Now, why should a group of colonists here be occupied by, yeah, they were occupying us, they were, oppressing us. Therefore, we go to war, the Revolutionary War. How many people die in the Revolutionary War? Nobody knows exactly. By the way, you'll find out when you look at the statistics of war dead that nobody ever knows exactly how many people die. Who cares? But 25,000 to 50,000 people die. Let's take the lower figure. 25,000 die in the Revolutionary War in a population of 3 million. That would be equivalent today to 2.5 million people dying in a war to get England off our backs. Well, you might consider that worth it, or you might not. Canada is independent of England. Aren't they? I think so. Not a bad society. They have good health care. They have a lot of things we don't have. They didn't fight a bloody Revolutionary War. Why do we assume that you had to fight a bloody Revolutionary War to get rid of England? Do you know that, I always start off saying, do you know, because I figure people don't know this and they'll be gratified that I'm telling them this. That in the year before the first shots were fired, those famous shots, the shot that was heard around the world, Lexington, Concord, April of 1775, the beginning of the Revolutionary War, that the year before that, farmers in western Massachusetts had driven the British government out of most of western Massachusetts without firing a shot. They had assembled by the thousands and thousands around courthouses, around official offices, and they just taken over, and they said goodbye to the British officials. It was a nonviolent revolution that took place. But then came Lexington and Concord, and the revolution became violent, and then the revolution was taken over, not by the farmers, taken over by the founding fathers. Farmers were rather poor. The founding fathers were rather rich. The Revolutionary War is not as simple as it first seems, independence from England, good. Not that simple. Who actually gained from that victory over England? There were people who gained, no question about that. But it's very important to ask, especially if you're considering a war or evaluating a war, who gained what? And differentiate among the different parts of the population about who benefited from a certain policy. That's one thing we're not accustomed to in this country, because we don't think in class terms. We think, we all have the same interest. We all have the same interest, independence from England. We did not have all the same interest. Do you think the Indians cared about independence from England? No. In fact, the Indians were unhappy that we won independence from England, because England had set a line. The Proclamation of 1763 has set a line and said, you can't go westward into Indian territory beyond this line. And they didn't do it because they loved the Indians. They didn't want trouble, right? When Britain was defeated in the Revolutionary War, that line was eliminated. And now the way was open for the colonists to move westward across the continent, which they did for the next 100 years, committing massacres and making sure that they destroyed Indian civilization. So you're going to say, when you look at the American Revolution, hey, there's a factor you have to take into consideration. The Indians, no, didn't benefit. Did blacks benefit from the revolution? Slavery was there before, slavery was there after. No, we remained a slave society after the revolution. Not only that, we wrote slavery into the Constitution. We legitimized it. What about class divisions? Why do we assume, well, aside from blacks and slaves and Indians? What about just ordinary, let's say, white farmers? Did they have the same interest in the revolution as John Hancock or Gouverneur Morris or Madison or Jefferson or the slave owners or the bondholders? Not really. It was not all the common people getting together to fight against England. Washington had a very hard time assembling an army. Well, they've got an army. They promised people. They took poor guys and promised them land. They browbeat people, and oh yes, and of course they inspired people. Well, let's have the Declaration of Independence. Wow, this is what we're fighting for. It's always good if you want to get people who go to war to give them a good document and to have good words in life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Yeah, that's what we're fighting for. Of course, when they write the Constitution, it's not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When they write the Constitution, it's life, liberty, and property. Have you noticed that difference? You should take notice of these little things. There were class divisions. When you assess and evaluate a war, when you assess and evaluate any policy, you have to ask who gets what. And out of this policy, it's not, oh, the same for all of us. Oh, we're going to raise taxes. On whom? On which part of the population? We're going to spend money. On whom? No. And what about the revolution? Is there a class division there in the benefits of the revolution? And oh, yes. We were a class society from the beginning. American society started off as a society of rich and poor, of people with enormous grants of land and people with no land. And there were riots. There were bread riots in Boston and flour riots. And there were rebellions all over the colonies of poor against rich, of tenants breaking into jails to release people who were imprisoned there for non-payment of debt. There was class conflict. We try to pretend in this country we're all one big happy family. We're not. And so when you look at the American Revolution, you have to look at it in terms of class. Do you know that in the, again, my air of superiority, did you know what I know? Well, I know you know things that I don't know, but I may as well take advantage of what I know to lord it over everybody else. Do you know that there were mutinies in the Revolutionary Army by the privates against the officers? I ask you, do you know? Because when I studied the American Revolution, when I studied American history, and I'm talking about not just in elementary school, I went to graduate school. I want you to know that. I got a PhD in history. Really. Did I ever learn in my whole undergraduate, graduate education, did I ever learn about mutinies in the Revolutionary Army? No. Well, there's a lot I didn't learn. When I got out of school, I began to learn things. That's when you begin to learn, right? You go to the library. There's nothing like a library. And there were mutinies of ordinary soldiers who saw the way the officers were treated. The officers were getting fine clothes and good food and high pay, and the privates were, well, you saw the Valley Forge and the no shoes and the bad clothes, and they weren't getting paid. They mutinied, thousands of them, and not just 5 or 10, thousands of soldiers mutinied. So many, the mutiny in the Pennsylvania line, as it was called. George Washington worried about this. It was too much to handle. He couldn't put this down. So he made compromises with them. But later, when there was a smaller mutiny in the New Jersey line, not with thousands, but maybe with hundreds, Washington said, execute the leaders.